When her mother, Rosemary, received the letter, she didn't hesitate much and called the police again. The police rushed to the door to gather evidence. When they arrived, Elizabeth's father, Joseph, was squeezing the letter and could not stop sighing. In the letter, Elizabeth wrote determinedly that she was now with a friend, and that her parents should not try to look for her, or she was going where you will never find her. Rosemary wipes tears from her eyes as she speaks of her disappointment in her daughter. The father, Joseph, shook his head at his daughter's behavior and couldn't understand why she was doing such an inexplicable thing. On this day, Joseph originally wanted to be BQ in the yard of his house as a way to relieve his wife's mind. But the sudden appearance of the letter so that the couple can no longer interest. A few days later, Joseph told his wife that he was both sad and disappointed that his daughter had left. But it was too torturous to think about these things every day. So he would turn his grief into motivation and concentrate on new engineering drawings in his newly built underground studio. Rosemary, knowing her husband best, nodded thoughtfully. But Elizabeth's best friend doesn't believe in the Elizabethan occult story at all. She was convinced that something had happened to Elizabeth. Prisoners, more or less, get a release. But at this point in time, Elizabeth was worse than a prison inmate. In the darkness of the dungeon, Elizabeth could not see a bit of sunlight and also completely lost the concept of time. She didn't know whether it was sunny or cloudy outside, whether it was morning or evening. Just as Elizabeth was trying to get used to the dark room, the door was opened again. No doubt it was the same man. He was the only one who came here every day, happily tormenting Elizabeth. He even called it the Underground Honeymoon Suite. Not only that, but he even recounted the whole story of Elizabeth's family BBQ in the courtyard to Elizabeth. Those idiots really believed you were a runaway. No one could have imagined that you were 5 meters under their feet. By this time, Elizabeth had no strength to grieve, and a surge of anger welled up in her heart. She stared at the man in front of her and asked, word for word, "Why did you do this to me, Dad? Dad?" Looking at his timid and angry daughter, Joseph was not surprised or furious. Instead, he opened his arms to Elizabeth. After a tight embrace, Joseph spoke fondly to his daughter. "Of course, I was afraid that you would turn away from me and no longer belong to me." These words instantly reminded Elizabeth of a nightmare from her past. And she tried with all her might to push her father away. In fact, Elizabeth was assaulted by her own father when she was 11 years old. This is what led her to run away from home when she was older. At the age of 15, Elizabeth found the courage to leave the house. The police returned her home 3 weeks later, unable to stop her father's search. But Elizabeth wasn't satisfied and kept preparing for her second runaway. She enrolled in a waitress training course, the equivalent of a vocational school. The father, Joseph, on the other hand, seemed to be acutely aware of his mistake and despicability. In the days that followed, he treated his daughter courteously, always taking care to maintain a sense of distance from her. Joseph's behavior gradually reassured Elizabeth. After all, she thought, flesh and blood, her father might never be like that again. But the truth is that perverted old men don't come to their senses. They only become more unscrupulous and vicious as a way to satisfy the dirtiest desires of their hearts. While Elizabeth was studying, Joseph was busy converting the basement of the house. He says he wants to build himself a work paradise, a dedicated office where he could draw drawings and work on the new engine in peace. But, in retrospect, it was all a blindfold to get Elizabeth to let her guard down. After Elizabeth's 18th birthday, Joseph felt the time was finally right. On the 28th of August, Joseph suddenly asked his daughter for help, saying that there was a door in the basement that could not be hung into the frame. And so the opening scene unfolded. Who would have thought? Who would have thought that a small favor for her father would land her in hell? After 6 months of captivity, the chains on Elizabeth were removed by Joseph. However, it wasn't because Joseph began to believe her. Rather, it was because the long chains would prevent him from doing his business with his daughter. Elizabeth, who had more freedom of movement, felt that the situation was beginning to slowly turn around. She must escape. Translated with deepl.com, free version.